Okay, so let's have a look at modeling not with polygons and boxes, but with splines. So in 3ds Max, we operate in this area here. So these are our splines, and basically splines are pretty much two-dimensional shapes, like so. Lots of different ones. This one's particularly useful, this n-gon. I'm going to come back to that one in a little while, mainly because it does this. It turns from a circle into a square whilst using only 4 points and maybe even 3 points. We can get it down, so we have a lot of control with this one. We can do some interesting things with that later on. Of course, we have text. With the text, you just simply type in whatever it is that you wish to type in there. So I'm going to look around the room, find a word that I'm going to call it unreal. And of course, when you have your text like that, I'm just going to turn it around so you can read it. You can use a modifier like extrude. So let's just look for the extrude in the modifier list. And put a little extrude on there and just increase the amount in the parameters, and there you have it. A little bit of 3D modeling just from an outlined spline. All of these of course can have an extrude. I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to paste it onto this paste instance. So when you paste an instanced copy, what you do with one of those instances affects the others, so it can be really useful. So you can see all of these shapes. I'm just pasting on, just pasting an instance in there. All of these shapes can have extrudes on them. Okay, so just delete those for a sec. So back to this section. Now you'll see when I hover over it, they're referred to as shapes, just two-dimensional shapes. That's what they are. But you'll see directly underneath we've got splines and NURB curves, compound shapes, extended splines. We have a whole plethora of different types of splines in here. Really useful for modeling. They have these. Some of these have really nice functionality like corner radiuses, etc., to do some really nice modeling. Be careful when you're using the corner radius. If I zoom in a little bit, you'll see this. When you're using the corner radius, be careful not to overlap like that. I'll show you why. I'll put my extrude on there. So let's look for that extrude again. And you see, because of the way that the curve has overlapped, we get this false extrusion. So we've just got to go back to that curve, undo the corner radius, and you'll see that the extrusion then becomes faced both on the top and on the bottom. Okay. Again, this is a really nice way of modeling certain shapes. Personally, I really like it as a working process. You have to get used to what's going on here, but once you do, there's an awful lot of power inside this modeling process. Things like interpolation, so stepping up and stepping down, you'll often see this option of steps, and steps are brilliant, particularly if you're working in something like the games industry, because, well, for any industry I suppose, that requires you to think carefully about the amount of polygons that you're creating, because we can increase or decrease the polygon count at an instant. So if an object it's decided that an object is at way back of the scene and unimportant, you can just use the steps to leave the profile of the shape like that, but minimize the poly count. And of course, when you're dealing with shapes, you're also got the option of the parameter rollout here to change width, dimension, length, thickness, etc. of that shape. Okay, again, very, very useful. I mean, you can, of course, just say, right, I'm really happy with that. That's a good starter point. I want to convert that to a poly. If you do, you will lose the functionality that you've got here, the actual shapes parameter functionality and the extrude. Basically, you'll just be collapsing it to a poly and you'll be going back to box modeling, which is not a problem. It's just you need to be aware of that. It can be really useful, of course. So we could take that and then begin pretty much as you've been doing all along. Begin modeling it just like you did previously. And and you're off. And it's a very interesting process. But anyway, I'll just step back again, delete what I have here, come out of there, come out of that sub-object level, just delete that, select all, delete that. So back to my shapes. And that was inside extended splines. We'll look at some of these later on. We won't probably have time, given the length of the course, to look into NURBS curves, but we can accommodate the same sort of functionality just using splines. Okay, so one of the things that we'll get used to when we're creating our first shape is, let's take this line tool. This is a very useful tool. We're going to take that line tool to begin with. So I'll click the line tool. I like to create the line in either the top view, that's T for top, or the front view, whichever you like. I'm going to go with top view. And this is really important. When you're creating a line like this, make sure that you are choosing, I always do this anyway as a start point. You'll see why later on, it'll become clear. The creation method, set the initial type to corner and set the drag type to corner to begin with. We can change it later, but to begin with, do it like that. And then we can use our snaps. So right click on snaps, make sure we're going to grid points in this instance. That's all I need. And I'm just going to go click and click. Oh, by the way, I have already set the units to centimeters. And you remember we're doing this because our game engine, Unreal, is basically 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. Oh, and I haven't got I can do that now. I'm going to go 1:1 system scale. So system scale and display scale 1:1 centimeter. Okay, so I'll turn my snaps off, hitting S on the keyboard. Okay, so this is a really useful straight line. Looks like it's not doing anything, but it will in a moment, because I'm going to take a circle. And again, I'm going to just drag this out on the top view so you can see it. I think I'll put my snaps on and I'll just go corner to corner like that. I'll try that again, corner to corner. Okay, and then I'll make a small one, smaller one. Okay, turn my snaps off. Okay, back to, I'm just going to switch now viewport back to perspective. So there's our shapes. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to use my angle snaps, choose my rotation tool. I prefer to hit E on the keyboard to do that rather than going up and clicking up here. So E, rotate it 90 degrees, there it is. And then in the front viewport, I'm just going to raise it so that it's sitting above the 0 line. Okay, good. Back to perspective. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this will become clear. So I've got a straight line, got a couple straightforward shapes, 2 circles. Each of those circles, I'll just clarify this with you, each of those circles, when I go back to the modifier tab, has parameters, which we can still access. And it's got the interpolation steps, take it right down, you've got a square. And then, of course, every time, the interpolation steps are basically like tiny, tiny divisions between each of these 1, 2, 3, 4 vertex. So if I hit 1, you get, between each vertex, you get 1 division. That's a step. If I hit 2, you'll have 2 divisions between each of those 4 vertices that you saw. And so on, and so on. So we can step up and step down in terms of resolution, in effect. Okay. Rendering can be useful because you can render this in the viewport, and you can set a thickness like so. I think my mic is crackling ever so slightly, and I do know why, because the lead's a little bit dodgy. Hope that's not bothering you too much. But anyway, you can render this out as an object, as a 3D object, just by choosing the render option, and we can smooth it, etc. But I'm not interested in that just right now, but just so you know it's there. Okay, so we're going to take this straightforward line. Look inside it. You've got vertex, segment, and spline. Much as you might have your 5 sub-object levels when you're dealing with a polygon, inside a spline you've got 3 sub-object levels. You've got the vertex, like so, you have the segment, and you have the overall spline. So basically I click that, I'm actually taking the whole spline, and a little bit like element within the sub-object levels of a polygon, we have a sub-object spline level because often we're going to be joining splines together, and having a sub-object spline level lets us select and transform individual splines that are perhaps that have been collected together, okay, grouped together or attached to one another, etc. Okay, so just be aware of that. So what I'm going to do is a very simple process to get you going. And we're going to take this, we're going to start to join these objects on to this spline, and the process that we're going to be using is called lofting. Massively powerful process once you get your head around the actual dynamics of it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to be creating, in effect, a compound object. So what we do is go back to create, we go inside we go inside the first tab, the Create tab, and we go for Compound Objects, and we choose Loft. Okay, so just be aware that that little move that I made, I've gone from the shapes across to the geometry, and then I've selected, rather than standard primitives, I've gone down a couple and chosen Compound Objects. When I do that, I have the Loft available to me. Okay, when the Loft is available, we can do some interesting things. Now, before I do anything, I just want you to be aware of this, where it says path parameters. So currently it's at 0. We're going to leave it at 0 for the moment, and I'll show you what's going to happen to that in a moment. Okay, so I'm just going to say get shape, and I'm going to choose the smaller shape to begin with. And you'll see as I hover over that first the smaller circle, a little plus key arrives, and I click it, and basically an instance of that circle gets lofted along that vertical spline. Okay, let's have a quick look at this. There's some complexity going on here that's not immediately apparent, so let's have a little look at this. So the first thing is the position of it. It started at 0 and went to 100. So I'll just make that really obvious for you. I'm going to use X-ray mode, which is Alt and X on your keyboard, so you can see what I'm about to do. So I'm just going to go into X-ray mode, and that allows us to see through the object. And what I'm going to do is going to go into shape steps first of all, and I'm going to reduce that down to 1. Keep your eye on the object as well as I do it, and you'll see that between, like I was saying before about the square, between each of the 4 vertex that define this circle, I'm now dividing it only once. That's a shape step. And then on the path itself, that's the vertical path, I'm only going to divide it once. Okay, so now what you've got, we've got a vertex at the bottom, a vertex at the top that's been divided once, giving us, in effect, this middle section. If I change that to 2, you see the outcome. Okay, now, if you look at how smooth that object is, currently the division is only 1 division between each of the vertex. If I make it to 2, just like we did before, it gets more and more circular and more complex. Okay, so when we're modeling, we can step up and down, which is really useful. I'm going to keep it really simple to begin with. So I'm going to say 1 division or 1 path step for the division between there and there. Okay. We can come back to that anytime and alter it. Okay. So the next thing I want you to be aware of is this thing called the path parameter. And what's going to happen here is that as I move this dial, you'll see that little yellow X in the viewport sliding along the path. And basically it's going from 0% to 100%. So what I'm going to be doing in a moment is I'm going to be choosing a position somewhere along this vertical spline, and I'm going to say at a particular position, and I'll say, let's say 30% along. So that's 30% along the path. I'm going to add a new shape, and the shape that I'm going to add is the larger of the circle. And when I'll hover over it, I get a little plus key and I click it, and the object becomes interesting. I'll just step out of before I step out of it, you can see that actually that shape has been added at the 30% point along that path. So just to clarify what's going on here, remember on the options over here on the skin parameters, we've got a path step of only one. So between that vertex and this new shape that we've added, we've got one division. That's one path step. And between 30% and 100%, we've also got one path step. We can, of course, as I was saying earlier, we can alter that anytime to improve the flow of the object or the complexity of the object. I'm going to keep it simple for the moment. I'm just going to go Alt and X to step out of that view so you can see the object that we've created. And what I'll do as well, I'll just move the object away. So just to be clear what's happened, I've got my vertical spline, which is the path that I used, and that path had two objects pushed along it. So the first one was the smaller circle, was pushed from 0 to 100%, and then I added a second circle, the larger of the two shapes, at 30%, and it went from 30% to 100%. Okay, so there's our splines. Here is our loft. So when I activate it, you'll see that it's called Loft 002. Now, if I go over to the Modifier tab, I still have, and this is where it gets interesting, I have access to all the path options that we saw before, skin parameters for, like doing the steps or the shape steps, so I can still access those. But I also have an additional set of parameters down here called deformations. These are very powerful. So I'll just start with, I'll not go through all of them right now, but one that I really want to show you is the scale parameter. So I'll just click it. Up pops this window, and basically that is 0% along the path, and that's 100% along the path. If I change either one of those positions, just grab it. I'm using the Move and Control Point tool. I change it, you should see an update in the loft. Now you'll see that because I've gone below the 0 point here, it's crossing over, so we don't want that. We want to be sure that we're not having that. So I'm going to go down there. And also, really nice thing here is if I click on that particular vertex there, I can make it into a Bezier corner. That allows me to change the curvature of the object. I don't want to go below the 0. I want to keep it like so. I can do whatever I want at this point. So if I just drag that down a little bit so you can see a little bit more of the object, take it down, I can control the curvature and change it as I wish to. So I'll just undo that last move. I'll take it to about there, I think, like so. Okay, so that's the first of the deformations, the scale deformation, really useful tool. Okay, so my loft with these two shapes has got a little bit of a deformation on it now. I'm also able to go inside the loft and go to the individual shapes, and I can change them. So if I now, I have to admit that finding the shapes sometimes is not so simple. Sometimes you'll find with your lofting process you won't see them so easily, but because I've used the deformation, there's a bit of space there and you can grab it a little bit easier. But if I grab that shape and then get the scale and uniform tool, I can change that shape like so. I'm just going to undo that. Come round again. I also want to show you that if I go back to one of the initial shapes that I'm just going to come out of that sub-object level for a moment, and if I select one of these, I can also go back and change the shape again just by rescaling the radius of the larger circle. So there's a lot of modeling capacity built into this, and there's a whole lot more that we can do with this, but just to begin with, that's a good process. Just before I sign off, because I'm getting to 20 minutes here, so just before I sign off, I'm just going to go back to the loft and I'm going to add another shape. Well, I'm actually going to use the same smaller circle, but I'm going to put it at a different position along the pathway. I reckon you should try this and experiment. So I'm going to say at 100%, no, 90, no, I'll say 80% along the pathway, I'm going to add that smaller circle again. The shape becomes redefined. So I've got, it's been applied there and it's been applied there. This one's got the larger circle. And now what I'm also going to say is that at 100% along the pathway, I'm actually going to put the same shape again. Right, okay, so I've placed it once, twice, 3 times, and I've placed the larger circle just there once. This gives me control again at this level. So if I go inside the loft now, I can go to shape. So that was the third one I added, that was the second one I added, and that was the first one I added. So if I say, for example, take that one, I can now do things with it independent of the other 2 shapes. Okay. Again, a really nice, simple way to get into your modeling. Why don't I go back to loft, and we've only used one deformation, that's scale. Okay. So between lofting, changing the scale in the deformation rollout, either changing the radius parameter of these or going to the shape itself inside the loft, we can do a lot of additional modeling to that object. And this really is only the beginning of it. So I'd like you just to experiment with that process. I'm just going to go into this one before I sign off. I'm just going to squidge it that way, like so. And maybe one last little thing. I'll go to the loft itself and I'll look at the shape steps. I'll increase those. I'll increase the path steps. And now it's getting much, much smoother. Okay, it's something to play with. To start with, I'll sign off there. 23 minutes, longer than I thought it was going to be. Do apologise, but good practice all the same. Alright, cheers.